everything is fine. Oh, 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 everything is alright. Oh, oh, oh.
Hello, my name's Nigel, and welcome to my podcast, Songs Nobody Asked Me For. I have a cold in the nose, in particular, and so my nose is running quite a lot, sniffy, coughy, all that sort of stuff. But so I'm going to have a try at this, see where it goes, see whether I can successfully do a podcast without, dribbling and spitting and coughing everywhere. We will see. Thing I had in mind today was just to sort of be considering a little bit something that I talked a little bit about with Holly when I met her the other week, around the difficulties of surviving as a musician today, really. One of the arguments I put forward with her at the time was that I wasn't actually sure it was a lot different than it was when I was, doing music in, say, the early 90s, really. And it was quite hard to sort of decide whether or not that was the case. It's different, but I wondered if there were a lot of similar themes. And mainly, the theme that sits there is of musicians being screwed over, really, and being how hard it is to sort of move forward and make a living in this world, really. And I think I can only talk about the sort of maybe the bottom 2 or 3 rungs of the music business. Being out there, small band, not sure what you're doing, not sure how to move forward, getting some traction. And I think that's always been hard. And I'm going to share in a minute some of my experiences, I guess, from around 89 through to sort of 92 in London. And then the experience of trying to do that nowadays in sort of 2020 on to sort of 26, really. Maybe a bit before, but I think that's a useful sort of sound period of time, really. I'm just going to pause for a second because I have a little heater on here and I realise I need to switch it off, because if I don't, it's going to come on in the middle of the podcast. So I'm just going to do that. Aha, there we are. So my argument basically was that at a time when essentially platforms like Spotify one might feel are screwing us over, really. They change the algorithms all the time, and they change the sort of policies and arrangements for paying artists. And whereas I used to get paid this tiny small amount, I only get paid a small amount now once a track of mine reaches 1,000 listens. And I think that's 1,000 listens in a year. Before that, I don't get anything. And this doesn't seem right, And I know for many musicians it doesn't seem right. And especially when I think that, they strongly protect my copyright, so that, as some of you may or may not remember, early days, I think it was about episode 11, episode 12, I had an episode blocked because Spotify said that I was infringing somebody's copyright, and I was infringing my own copyright. And had a big bun fight with them about the fact that I had a right to use the music that was actually my music. And I was a bit frustrated at the time because this was new and I was bringing out a podcast every week, and I really felt that it needed some traction to do that. And of course, I was sitting and waiting, and it was about 3 or 4 weeks before they resolved it. So I put an emergency pod out at the time, I remember, 12A. You can find 12A and then you'll find my emergency podcast, in which I was pretty grumpy about it. But Holly and I were talking about this, and not only the sort of the dodgy dealings and backgrounds of the owners and people who run Spotify, but how for all of us artists, big or small, really, you're kind of on a hiding to nothing in terms of making any money from it. And talking about the idea that maybe it's impossible for young bands to develop or move forward because maybe one of the things you had to make money was your album or your EP or your cassette that you would have made. But now even that's just seen as a sort of extra. It's like merch. It's merch. It's like having a T-shirt or a pin badge. It's something that it's not even worth that because people can just go and listen to it on Spotify, or other platforms. And I think that the danger for me when we talked about it, I said it at the time, was that I thought that it can make the past sound like in some way it was so much easier, and at that level it wasn't. At that level it wasn't. I think there are some things that are easier. I think rungs number 4 or 5, which I now think someone has sawn off, which is probably why it's so difficult today, would be, getting your battered van, going off on tour, going around the country, playing small venues that there were a lot more of, and making some money out of that as well, making money out of that, which I think is very, very difficult to do now, and I know it is. It's almost impossible to do. But nothing was straightforward. So when I think first of all about the idea that I get frustrated that my music is out there, but that I don't get paid much for it, if anything, I guess the opposite way of that back in the late 80s and early 90s was that my music just wasn't out there. We would go to recording studios. I've talked about that on other podcasts, and we would produce an EP, I guess you'd call it these days, or certainly a demo tape. We used to call it a demo tape. And maybe it's got 3 or 4 tracks on it. And then that would cost me money. So we would have to wait till we had the money to do that before we could really afford to sort of do something like a demo tape. But you needed one. We needed one in order to try and make it, which is basically the path, You're in rungs number 1 to 3 down the bottom there. And for a lot of bands, you're trying to shoot up that. And that, because that's where you make money. I was looking at, I have various bits and pieces about sort of places that we would play. I have a sort of leaflet from the Powerhouse here. And then I have a couple of pages ripped out of Time Out from, I think one is August and one is October 1990. And this is July 1990 at the Powerhouse here. So it's great, but you can look at the sort of, these would have been passed out around London, and a little leaflet with various people on it. Half Man, Half Biscuit were playing at the same venue. Hazel O'Connor. These people, some of you might recognise them, I don't know. There are other people in amongst this, in tiny little writing here, typed up, some bigger than others. But we have all of these, so we're playing gigs up in London. We're playing at the Royal Standard. We're playing at the Powerhouse, and the thing with it is that we're paying to play at the Powerhouse, and we're doing the Royal Standard for nothing. There was no possibility at that low level of being paid to play. Now there is these days the possibility of getting paid to play, and maybe you wouldn't be able to get paid enough to make a living, but we do get paid for some of our gigs. Now if there's now 5 of us in a band, you're probably looking at I don't know, 50 quid each. Now you'd have to be playing sort of, I don't know, 7 nights a week in order to, in any way, even that what would that pay me? I'm too tired because I'm poor. That's worth £350 a week, isn't it? Something like that, which is not a lot. But hey, that's for doing a gig. So we do get some money, but back then we didn't. We didn't get any money. So what you're looking for is you're looking to break through in some way. You're looking to develop 2 things really. One was a breakthrough, and that's around getting what they used to call an A&R man to come and see you, discover you, like your music, and say, oh yeah, we're gonna go for this, and sign you up. That's like, and again, that's pretty easily transferable onto football terminology and thinking back getting signed up to a big club, and the other was to create hype. And create a hype around you and who you were, and that was like a sort of, I don't know, a holy grail, but a sort of kind of a thing you couldn't really get a hold of. It's kind of how did you do that? And I think somebody will look back now, probably our playing and our music wasn't quite good enough to be able to do that, but for some people they were able to create this. I'm going to pause for a second because I'm about to sneeze, so I'm going to sit very still, and then I can seamlessly put it back on again in a minute. And there we are. So, I don't think we tried. I talked right at the very beginning. This was about the second podcast about how not to promote yourself, and we used to do lots of fly posting, and we made stickers. We used to go to tube stations handing out leaflets about us, and they were quite funny leaflets. So it was kind of little quotes about us, from famous people that obviously were not true. I remember one of them being from Tony Blackburn, I think. And he was just saying, I think in that quote, try saying brilliant but without saying brilliant. You just can't. It's amazing. And that type of thing. These silly little things that we would put on this stuff, but we were trying to create this little buzz, and no internet, no place of getting this out nationally, let alone globally. So it was very hard to do, very hard to develop. So that path was almost impossible. I mean, and of course, some bands do it, and occasionally some bands do that. They create a buzz, and slowly stuff happens. Now, within that, and in both these paths, there's something about knowing people, having the right people around. Well, actually, both knowing people and being able to sell yourselves. Pav, who was in my band with me in London, who you've met here a couple of times, he was in another band the last year or so that we were in London. I think they were called the Surfing Dead, and now I used to get really twitchy about that. I was more than happy. John has been in another band, and I really don't have a problem with it. But back then, I think because we were really struggling to get anywhere, and the two people that he set that band up with were two very fine-looking people, very attractive woman, attractive man, couple. They were married, and they were also both salespeople in the organisation. He worked for BT at that time, and they were salespeople, and they were really good at selling themselves. And they had a really good idea of getting her to play the drums, even though she didn't play drums. She had drum lessons, and because back then, again, we live in a sort of gendered and prejudiced world, and there weren't really many female drummers, if any. So having her playing the drums was a great gimmick, and it was a great way of how they looked and how they were. And also, they did a demo tape and they cut some vinyl, which they had the money to do because the two of them were a little bit wealthier than the rest of us. So they cut an album. Actually, it wasn't an album; it was a 12-inch called Cheeseburger. So I'm promoting it now. It was great. It was funny. It was good. But they managed to get their tape to John Peel up in Radio 1, and they did that because the woman who was the drummer hung around outside the back and looked far more interesting to talk to than I would have done, and had the balls to do it, and was there sort of like saying, "Oh, John, could you ever listen to this?" And was able to give him this demo tape. Whether we listened to it or not, I don't know. So there was something around having the people within your band that might be able to promote and sell you. And then there was something around creating a buzz, and I think they could have done a bit of that. Excuse me. And then the other was A&R Men. And A&R Men was hard, because you were sort of sending tapes off. You're sending a cassette tape off into the big unknown. And one of the things I get frustrated with these days is when you're trying to get gigs and you're sending emails out to people and knowing that, how do you make yourself look any different? Or you're contacting people on Facebook or Instagram, and how do you stand out, And this stuff's really hard. And I think back then you'd send a tape, and if you got any response, it was amazing. And I have one here. I have the only one I kept, because you get lots of very generic responses. This one here, I'm holding up if you're watching it on video, because it's got some writing on it as well. I'm going to read it to you. It's from WEA Records, and this is on the 2nd of February, 1990. And he's written 89 by mistake and crossed it out. And it's got God still doing that, exclamation mark. And it says, "Dear," this is the type bit, and then he's written my name. And the guy himself is a guy called Ben Wardle. Big up to Ben Wardle, he wrote this himself. He said, and then it's typed. It says, so Nigel is written by him. It says, "Thank you for submitting your material to WAA Records. We appreciate the amount of time, effort, and often money, indeed, that will have gone into the recording, but at this point in time, we do not feel sufficiently enthused to take it any further. However, thank you for thinking of WEA Records, and we wish you all the best for the future. Kind regards," and then it's hand signed, Ben Wardle. Now, I've probably had a dozen or so of these letters, and that would be it. They would just, But Ben added a little sort of PS at the end, which was very exciting for us at the time. And it says, because we were called Brilliant But, he's written, "Not brilliant, but ... And then he said, "Quite like the Fergal Sharkey influence," which surprised us and threw us. And then again, you're listening to your tapes thinking, Fergal Sharkey, and who is the lead singer of the Undertones at that time. "Let me know when the gigs are." Now, this is very exciting because that suggests that we may have somebody who would be interested in coming along. Now, if I said, let me know when the gigs are, that would be something I would say, because I would think, yeah, I'm going to go along. But with Ben, we had the same experience we had with many other people. In fact, I think I rang him. I do now, remember now. I rang and I got through to him, and I thought, this is great. It's one of the first A&R men I ever tried to ring, and I thought, wow, this is really easy. Got straight through to him, and he said, yeah, yeah, and he pretty much repeated that. He said, well, let me know when you're playing next, and I said, well, I could give you the date of the gig, and he said, oh, okay, and I gave him the date of the gig we were playing, and he said, oh, I'll try and get along now. And he didn't, of course, he didn't, didn't get there. And that's fine. But I think it kind of, this was the beginning of a period of, I've often talked about, I think, of a real lot of disillusionment and frustration for me, because I was waiting then for A&R people to come and discover us, or to arrive or turn up, because people would say they might. Could never get through to him in his office ever again. Never managed to get past the secretary. And didn't come along to a gig, and that was fine. And I think I might have, I think it was with Brad, about the final sort of nail in the coffin from an A&R man was when we were playing a gig, and a guy came up to me at the end and said, oh, have you got a demo tape? And normally I'd have a copy of our demo tape with us, but I didn't. And we just didn't happen to have any gigs arranged at that time. Probably did a week or two later, but. And he said, oh, well, where are you playing? Because I'll come and see you again. I'd love to come and see you again. And I said, oh, I haven't got a gig at the moment. And he was, his name was James Dewar, and he was from Island Records. And he said he caught the last half of our last song, which makes me smile, because it's a song called Grains of Sand. And actually, it's a song we play now, and we finished sets with now. So clearly there was something going on there. And he said, I really love the vibe, and I'd love to come and see you again. And I said, well, okay. And he gave me his card, and I sent him a demo tape, and it was just almost impossible to get hold of him then. And he, if I did speak to him, he'd say, oh, well, yeah, demo's okay. I didn't like this bit, didn't like that bit, and you're thinking, well, yeah, but do you like us? If you like us, you should get involved with us, and you could be helping us to sort of change it. Couldn't get him along to gigs. He never came back again, because I was always saying, look, we're better live than we are recorded, because I think we were then. Come and see us, and couldn't get it done. So, in the end, there's that real sense of pretty much helplessness, really, because you're really aware of so many bands around, no money being paid to you, less covers bands around, I think, but just a scene in London where, yeah, it was really quite exploitative, really. And I think when I was talking to Holly, I was saying, even before you go back to the 50s and the 60s, singers were products, and the singers didn't make a lot of money. It was the record companies. So the record companies make money. And I think with this reinvention of what's happened nowadays is there's this accessibility of platforms for us. So at one level, it's hugely liberating for musicians, because you can think, oh, I can get my music out. And I know, we tried a couple of times selling cassettes, but we would copy them ourselves and make them, and then have to make the covers ourselves, and we're really looking pretty amateurish because we couldn't afford it, and then you might sell one or two. But it's not like we were selling loads of our audio stuff. So yeah, nowadays, everybody can hear my stuff, and I can get people listening to us on Spotify, and it's fantastic, in a way. But in another way, of course, yeah, you're still being ripped off, because it's the companies that do that stuff now have somehow moved this from a space which could be, the internet's so liberating for us as artists, to a place where you kind of know you've got to be on Spotify in order to move forward at all and succeed, and you want people to listen to your stuff. There are other platforms that are better, but people don't listen to them so much. We could have our own website, and again, I dabbled with this, but mostly I had a free one and it wasn't very good. So you end up paying for it, or you really need someone to set one up for you. And then you need to get people to go look at it, which people are not always going to do. So I think it's generally, I don't think it's changed that much in terms of how it feels. The nature of it has changed. And the fact that I can be out here telling you about my music, and maybe you can go and have a listen, and maybe you'll follow us, and that's fantastic. There is so much more of that around. But the actual monetarization, is that the way to say it? Monetarization of what we do is still really hard for artists and musicians. And I do wonder whether it's just that we're kind of just very nice people mostly, and creative people, and sort of slightly kind of saps, really. We're the sort of people that's very easy to exploit, you know. And even if you look at the bands that were successful and still are, you're forever hearing of people suing for more money or suing because they were sold ridiculous contracts. And so, you know, the businessmen are out there creaming us off just like they are in society in general, really, I suppose. Um, yeah, that sounds a bit bitter and twisted. I don't feel it now because I'm a man in my later life who's had a successful life in lots of other different ways, and I still enjoy doing this stuff, love it. But when I speak to young musicians, I think, yeah, it's sad that something that should have liberated people and allowed them to create music for themselves and make money out of that still is not really possible. And then I think you just have to live with the message you get given by various celebrities and people who are quite well known, who either do music or entertainment shows, who would talk about the idea that, look, you can't do this stuff hoping to make money. You have to do it because you enjoy it. And I think that is a good message. You know, it's the same as AI. You know, so what if AI is making music? You know, it's just more competition for you. But you know, you just do your music. You go out there, you do your music, you enjoy it. But the problem with that is that's fine and dandy for someone like me who can afford to do it. But if you really do need to make money out of your music, monetizing it is very important to some people for that reason, and yeah, almost impossible. So yeah, it's a funny old thing. It's sad, really. I find it sad anyway. Right, so I'm going to quit before my voice is still with us. Do check out the band, hey, you know, and listen to our tracks multiple times, and then maybe we might make another $15 over the next year. You never know. Hashtag Music the Curve. Thank you for your time and your energy. Do like or subscribe to the channel wherever you're listening to this, and I'm hoping next week to be back with an interview, which I'm planning to do tomorrow. So, but sometimes I like to leave a little space between them. But we will see. Yeah, I'm hoping to. You'll know, and I guess next week I'll know. Okay. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.
Everything is